Season's greetings, boys and ghouls, and welcome to an especially spooky video! So, Halloween is upon us, the very best time of year, and one of my go-to traditions during the Halloween season is watching creepy old cartoons to get into the fall spirit. You know the ones I mean, those classic old shorts where a beloved character dukes it out with a cackling witch or a dancing mummy, preferably with lots of cuts to windy leaves blowing outside. There's something about the structure of a cartoon that's perfect for Halloween viewing. It's more than just nostalgia, it's that feeling of danger when a familiar character steps into an unfamiliar world. The emphasis on atmosphere, the exaggerated visuals, most importantly the bite-sized runtime, so we never have to wait too long for the danger to pass. I think it's the closest we've come in a visual medium to the feeling of telling ghost stories around a fire. Sure, you could also just watch a real horror movie like a grown-up, but it's not gonna have the same magic to it. Halloween's not supposed to be scary, it's supposed to be spooky, and nothing scratches that October itch like a good old-fashioned one-reeler. So to celebrate the day, I thought I'd walk you through 31 of my personal favorite spooky cartoons so that every day this month you too can share in the magic with me. A sort of Halloween advent calendar, if you will. Some of these you've probably seen before, others are a little more obscure. I've tried to give the list some variety and include a little bit of something for everyone, but that did mean leaving out some true classics. So if your favorite didn't make the cut, don't worry, just let me know in the comments what I missed and maybe we'll do another batch next year. But before we get started, I want to make one thing abundantly clear. This is a list of animated short films. It is not a list of television episodes. There are a million videos out there ranking Halloween specials from different TV shows, but not nearly enough appreciation for the bygone art of the standalone cartoon. So this is an attempt to correct that balance. It doesn't have to be a kid's cartoon, doesn't matter who made it or when, but it must at least be intended to exist on its own as a self-contained work. Other than that, anything goes, so let's get into it. Here they are, ranked from least to most spooky, your Fuddalicious Hallows Eve Spooktacular Cartoon Countdown. Ooh, so spooky! We're starting off with an obvious choice. The Skeleton Dance was the first film in Disney's Silly Symphony series, and it's easily the most famous Halloween cartoon ever made. Following the success of Steamboat Willie, Disney wanted to see how far he could push the relationship between animation and music, so he worked with future Looney Tunes composer Carl Stalling to tell a story with seemingly no story at all, where 100% of the action was dictated by the soundtrack. So a group of skeletons pop out of their graves one night, terrorize some animals, dance their cares away, and that's pretty much it. Scary. The animation is a little repetitive, even crude by modern standards, but this was a huge stepping stone for Disney at the time, proving that atmosphere itself could sell a film and that audiences would respond to artistry even without any popular characters to lead them along. Reportedly, it was banned in Denmark for its dark subject matter, and some critics at the time warned that it might be too scary for children. Though to be honest, I think those reactions were probably meant to be a little tongue-in-cheek. Macabre imagery wasn't uncommon in early cartoons, so the faux pearl clutching was probably just people playing along with the bit, all in good fun. The film was directed by Ub Iwerks, reigning king of rubber hose animation, who later left Disney and remade it for Columbia Pictures under the new title Skeleton Frolic, which, based on his relationship with Walt at the time, was basically like if he'd titled it Skeleton Dance, Ub's version. It's the original that remains a Halloween favorite, though, and a landmark piece of animation history. But the most important thing it did was pave the way for spookier cartoons to come. Casper is a good little boy and another obvious pick for this countdown since he's the only classic cartoon star who's specifically a Halloween character. That said, the Casper cartoons themselves aren't especially noteworthy. They were made as the golden age of animation was already winding down, so they're not all that ambitious, they're aimed at a pretty young audience, so they very rarely go for actual scares, and they all have basically the exact same plot. Casper wants to be friends, but everyone's afraid of him, then he meets someone who's not afraid, then something bad happens, then the two of them save the day. I watched all 55 Casper cartoons in preparation for this video, and at least 50 of them follow this formula to a T. So for lack of a clear MVP choice, I'm going with taboo or not taboo. A, because it's actually set at Halloween, and B, because it does at least show a modest amount of creativity.
Swing your partner, skip to the loose.
This was pretty early in Casper's run, so he hadn't settled into the sickly sweet style of the later films. The gags are a little looser and more fourth wall breaky, and the plot's not quite as rigidly formulaic as it would later become. Instead of befriending some small animal or lonely child, Casper attends a Halloween party and spends most of the runtime just vibing, bobbing for apples, square dancing with pretty girls, the usual stuff. The only real conflict is that he has to keep dipping himself in whitewash so people think his ghost sheet is just a costume, but beyond that it's mostly just a fun hangout episode, and it's even got a cute little twist at the end that I honestly didn't see coming. I still wouldn't call it a great cartoon. I think Casper works best in longer formats where you have more time to develop his relationships with the other characters, but if you're curious to see what he was like in his early screen outings, this is a good one to start with. Obviously, the best adaptation of Sleepy Hollow is the Disney version from 1949, but that version doesn't qualify for this list since it wasn't intended as a standalone short, regardless of how it was later sold. Don't worry, we'll talk about it someday, I promise. So that leaves room for the second best Sleepy Hollow adaptation, but unfortunately Wishbone doesn't qualify either, so we're stuck with this version instead.
In a remote period of American history, there was among the high hills, not far from Tarrytown, a drowsy little Dutch settlement, long known as Sleepy Hollow.
This is a storybook-style cartoon narrated by John Carradine that sticks closely to Washington Irving's original text. It was made in the 70s, so naturally there are some psychedelic visuals here and there, but nothing that'll be too alienating if that's not your thing. The main thing some people might take issue with is the design of Ichabod himself, which I frankly adore. Irving describes Ichabod as looking almost like a scarecrow, and the film really takes that comparison and runs with it. His limbs flail about as if independent from his body.
One might have mistaken him for the spectre of famine descending upon the earth.
The animation likewise has a lot of style and mood to it, which disguises the fact that it's pretty cheap. Mostly slow pans over still frames, monochromatic characters, featureless backgrounds, again all very 70s. If you've only seen the more famous Sleepy Hollow adaptations, you might be disappointed by how little the Headless Horseman is actually in this one. Certainly the final chase sequence is a bit of a letdown compared to Disney's, but this story was always more about the general nature of lore than any literal monster, and I think that's captured very well. Maybe not the best adaptation, but probably the one Irving himself would have most appreciated.
Porridge today, Gromit.
Not a lot of people think of the Wallace and Gromit cartoons as spooky, which is weird because all 5 of their films are clearly indebted to the horror genre. Yes, they're very silly and very British, but they're also high-stakes thrillers with menacing villains in which our heroes are usually just one stumble away from a grisly death. The title card drops alone should be more than enough to qualify this as a horror franchise. A Close Shave is my personal favorite of the bunch, and the one that scared me most as a kid. The plot is a bit too dense to summarize here, but it taps into a lot of the irrational fears I had in my younger days. Being wrongfully imprisoned, being betrayed by a pet, being swallowed up by giant machinery and turned into dog food, all things I was very convinced would happen to me at some point in my life, and for all I know, still will. There really is something uniquely grand about the Wallace and Gromit shorts, a sense of scale and wonder that the Aardman Studios never quite been able to replicate in their features. Even Curse of the Were-Rabbit doesn't really capture it. It's hard to pinpoint exactly what the secret ingredient is, but if I had to guess, I'd say it's mostly just a question of formatting. As features, these stories would feel a little thin, but as shorts, they're punching so high above their own weight class that it's impossible not to be astounded by them. You're watching a type of film that's usually 7 minutes long, in an era where cartoons aren't even a marketable art form, with animation so rustic you can literally see the fingerprints, so the last thing you're expecting is an epic 30-minute action spectacle with shots that look like this. It's a small film, but it feels huge, and when it wants to be, it's very scary indeed.
Booga, booga, booga!
Any countdown of Halloween cartoons is guaranteed to feature at least one appearance by Courage the Cowardly Dog, and somehow that still holds true even on a list like this one that prohibits TV shows.
Cartoons!
Courage's show ran for 52 episodes from 1999 to 2003, but he made his debut in a 1996 short film which later served as the pilot for the series, and which was even nominated for an Oscar but lost to A Close Shave, oddly enough. Here, Courage faces off against an extraterrestrial fowl set on turning all Earthlings into poultry by serving them mysterious spotted eggs. It's not the spookiest outing Courage has had. The show was renowned for its bold and disturbing visuals, and by comparison this is a relatively tame episode. But the villain is intimidating enough, a cousin of Feathers McGraw perhaps, and the sequence of Eustace transforming into a chicken is properly grotesque. What's most impressive though is that they already had the full groundwork for the series figured out from the very beginning. The show has such a distinct setting and strange brand of humor, and you'd expect that these things would take at least a few episodes to develop. But here we are, 3 years before the first season, and it's all already here. Everything except the voices, that is. We don't get any dialogue in this one except one line from Courage at the very end, sounding decidedly less cowardly than usual.
This shouldn't happen to a dog. Ouch!
Otherwise though, you could slot this one in anywhere in the show's run and most viewers wouldn't spot the difference, which just goes to show what a clear artistic vision they had in mind and how seamlessly they were able to pull it off. Sticking to the theme of chickens, A Morning Stroll takes a supposedly true story and repeats it 3 times in 3 different art styles across 3 different time periods. In 1959, a man is walking down the street when a solitary chicken crosses his path, trots over to a nearby apartment, knocks on the door, and is welcomed inside. The man watches, puzzled for a moment, but then shrugs it off and walks on. We then cut to present day and watch the same story again, except this time the man gets distracted by a breakdancing zombie game on his phone, and when he looks up, the chicken is gone. So far, so not spooky. But it's the 3rd segment that earns it a place on this countdown. Here we move into a post-apocalyptic future where humanity has been wiped out and only the undead walk the streets. Except of course our feathered friend, who's still out taking his daily stroll like always. A zombie watches him pass by and freezes where he stands. The chicken triggers something primal in whatever's left of his brain. His face scrunches into a ball, his veins pulse, every muscle tenses up as if on the verge of an explosion. And I'm going to go ahead and cut myself off there because I don't want to spoil the rest, but suffice it to say, if you're a fan of high-octane zombie action, do yourself a favor and check this one out. You won't be disappointed. I could easily have made this entire countdown out of nothing but Fleischer cartoons. The Fleischer brothers were early competitors of Disney's, best remembered today for wholesome characters like Popeye, Superman, and post-Hays Code Betty Boop. But in its heyday, their studio was the home of sex-crazed miscreants and ne'er-do-wells like Coco the Clown, Bimbo, and pre-Hays Code Betty Boop. Their first major success was a live-action animation hybrid series titled Out of the Inkwell, later renamed Inkwell Imps, in which Max Fleischer would be drawing at his desk when Coco would escape from the page and wreak havoc around the studio. Or conversely, Max would remain in control and Coco would be the one to be terrorized. Either way, they had a very unhealthy relationship. Here, Max and another animator draw Coco a haunted house to explore with his dog Fitz, where they discover a variety of bizarre horrors behind every door. The Fleischers considered themselves inventors first and animators second, so every cartoon was an excuse to experiment with different visual styles, and we see a ton of that here. Inkblots transform into ghostly shapes and threatening faces, stop-motion office supplies come to life and attack the characters, drawings are given such three-dimensionality that the artist can pull them right off the page. It all contributes to the general feeling of unease, as the characters are repeatedly scared out of their wits and bodies. There was little room for logic in Fleischer cartoons. They were meant to simulate the nature of dreams, or more often nightmares, so the bounds of reality were rarely paid any attention. We'll see more of their work later on, but this should give you a pretty good sense of how they like to operate. Jumping forward from the oldest film on this list to the newest, Possessions was created in 2013 as part of a multimedia anime project titled Short Piece, though I first saw it separately as part of that year's Oscar-nominated shorts package. The film depicts a wandering traveler who gets lost in the woods and seeks refuge in an abandoned shrine. After falling asleep, he wakes up in a clean, empty room where he's subjected to a most unusual haunting by these guys. The spirits of several dozen broken umbrellas appear and sing to him about how they've outlived their usefulness and must now be thrown away. But the traveler sees things differently. Instead of being afraid, he sees the beauty in the umbrellas and sets about repairing them, one by one, until they're all as good as new. The spirits express their approval and disappear, but shortly afterwards he's greeted by another apparition. A new voice taunts him from the walls as a tornado of tattered fabric surrounds him and swallows him up. But again, the traveler is undeterred. Finally, he's confronted by a much more monstrous being as a mountain of trash forms into a giant malevolent creature and attacks him. Realizing he can't possibly repair every broken item in this shrine, he instead closes his eyes and says a prayer of thanks for the many years of service these things have provided. There's probably a lot that went over my head in this one. The short is inspired by the Japanese idea of tsukumogami, spirits who inhabit old inanimate objects and about whom I know very little, so I'm sure there's a lot of cultural context I missed. But at its base level, the film functions as a poignant meditation on the way we treat material goods and how we still owe them some degree of respect even when we're ready to throw them away. It's a lovely message that I try to keep in mind whenever I'm ready to retire a well-worn possession. The things we own do have meaning, even if it's just the meaning we put into them, and whether or not you believe in ghosts, it's worth taking a moment to say thank you to the part of yourself you leave when you leave them behind. Popeye starred in over 100 cartoons for Fleischer, and by the mid-30s was already the studio's most popular character. But his crowning achievement came in 1936, when he faced off against Sinbad the Sailor in a two-reel high-seas adventure. Like the Wallace and Gromit shorts, part of the appeal here was how much bigger this was than other Popeye outings. It was twice as long, it was in color, and it even had a fake cast list in the opening credits to give you the sense that you were watching a legitimate motion picture and not just a silly little cartoon. Added to this, the animation was spectacular. The backgrounds were created with a sort of rudimentary multiplane device, where characters moved across miniature live-action sets on a turntable to create some stunning 3D landscapes. This process had already been explored in the black and white Popeyes, but it has a totally different effect in color. Every shot feels enormous, and the horizon looks like it's 100 miles away. Ray Harryhausen even said it was an inspiration for his Sinbad picture, which you can definitely see.
The most remarkable, extraordinary fellow.
Sinbad, played by Bluto of course, lives on an island with all the monsters he's conquered, but when he spies olive oil on the bow of a nearby ship, he sends a giant bird to capsize the vessel and bring the fair damsel to him, leaving a shipwrecked Popeye to come to her rescue. And also Wimpy's here too.
How did you get in here?
It's a bit of a stretch to call this a spooky cartoon. There are other Popeyes out there that are more overtly Halloween-y, but it is the best Popeye cartoon, and it's got enough scary monsters in it to justify its inclusion. Plus, Popeye literally says the word spooky at one point, so I think that's enough to count it.
It's kind of spooky to me around here.
Fleischer followed this up with two more two-reel Popeye pictures, parodying Alibaba and Aladdin, but neither matches the grandeur of this one. This is the Sailor Man at his biggest and best. Paul Terry is probably the most important animator you've never heard of. Starting out in the 1910s, Terry produced over 1,000 cartoons across 4 decades and earned a tremendous amount of respect within the industry. Not because his films were all that good, but because he put them out so quickly that he kept animation alive while the other studios were floundering. There wasn't a ton of demand for cartoons in cinema's early days. Audiences saw them as a fun novelty, but no more so than live-action shorts, which were much cheaper to make. And by the mid-20s, many theater owners were considering taking them out of the rotation altogether. But Terry maintained public interest by prioritizing quantity over quality, utilizing as many shortcuts as possible to release cartoons at about twice the rate of his competitors, and in the process proving that animation could be a viable business model while allowing other studios the time they needed to grow it into an art form. In many ways, you could say he was the Roger Corman of his day. This isn't even to say that the Terry toons were bad, just that they were generally forgettable without any real standout episodes, but I do quite like this one, in which Gandy Goose and Sourpuss stumble across a deserted town full of singing ghosts who just really love singing about being ghosts.
It's Ghost Town, it's Ghost Town.
This was hardly a novel premise. Every major studio had about a half-dozen cartoons just like it, but it does a few things to rise above the crowd. For one, I love the look of it. The only thing better than a good Halloween aesthetic is a good Western aesthetic, so seeing them combined is always a treat. Special shout out to whoever painted the faces on these houses, very good. For another, it's not afraid to go dark when it needs to. We get a lot of good ghoulish gags, and there's a surprisingly upsetting sequence where a vulture eats Sourpuss's horse when his back is turned. And best of all, we get not one, but 2 different songs from the Ghost, both of which are total bangers worthy of inclusion on any Halloween playlist.
Every ghost can boast from coast to coast. What he likes to be most is a ghost.
Again, nothing that out of the ordinary here. If I had a nickel for every singing ghost cartoon out there, I'd have like $2 worth of nickels. Like about 40 nickels. But this one's got the looks, it's got the music. For a Terry tune, you could do a lot worse. Hold on, you say. A Christmas Carol has no business on this list. I don't care how many ghosts are in it. This isn't a Halloween story, it's a Christmas story. It should be watched in December, not October. Well, naysayers, you're correct. A Christmas Carol is most definitely a Christmas story, and there are dozens of great film versions out there that are perfect to watch during the Christmas season. This one, you should watch at Halloween. The film is directed by Richard Williams, and like everything he ever touched, it's mesmerizing. Williams famously animated on ones, meaning 24 separate frames of animation per second as opposed to the usual 12, resulting in twice as much work but a beautifully fluid final product where each image flows seamlessly into the next. Add to that his exhilarating 360-degree camera work, and the film feels like it's flying through the world of Dickens on a trapeze, carrying us effortlessly across each scene with just a touch of its hand.
Good heavens.
The voice of Scrooge is provided by Alistair Sim, who previously played the character back in the 50s in what still remains the definitive film version of the story. Please note I said definitive, not best. I see you, Muppet fans.
Thank you for not shouting at me.
But the effect of casting Sim is that it feels less like an original retelling and more like we're being walked through a series of memories. He recites the familiar lines and the images dance through our heads, but it's all more suggestive than literal. He's not bothering to fully recreate each scene because he knows we already know what happens. At some points he even tees up his own dialogue just to save time.
Yes, I know. You'll tell me that many can't go there, and many would rather die. Well, we'd better do that, than decrease the surplus population.
Most importantly for this video, though, the film is scary as hell. Lots of Christmas carols skip over the more morbid sections of the story, but Williams faces them head-on, fully embracing the terror of Scrooge's journey and making it very clear what kind of torment his soul is in for if he doesn't repent.
The air was filled with moaning phantoms. Their misery was plainly that they had lost the power to interfere for good in human matters.
If you prefer to watch the film in December, that's your choice, and I respect you, but the way it's told here, this is much more of a ghost story than a Christmas one, and if you ask me, now's the perfect time of year for it. Warner Brothers didn't often go for full-on scares in their cartoons since their characters were mostly indestructible and always one step ahead of any real danger. But one film of theirs that scared the pants off me as a kid was Birth of a Notion, a Daffy Duck vehicle from the character's adolescent years.
I've got a scheme that will get me a home for the winter.
Despite the title, the short bears no relation to the racist-ass film by racist-ass W. Griffiths, but rather sees Daffy conning his way into a cozy suburban home because he's too lazy to fly south for the winter, though unbeknownst to him, the home's owner is a scientist in need of a duck for his latest experiment.
And a wishbone from a duck. I'll have to get a duck somewhere.
The villain is a caricature of Peter Lorre, and like all Looney Tunes caricatures, it's spot on. But to a 5-year-old child who didn't know who Peter Lorre was, this was just about the scariest depiction of a human being I'd ever seen. Everything about him is terrifying, from his giant sunken eyes to the way he hyperventilates when he laughs to that horrible smile that stays glued to his face even when Daffy's trying to kill him. Oh yeah, now the reason this one's scary is because Daffy is a full-on attempted murderer here. The moment he realizes what's going on, he turns straight to homicide with only the barest pretense of self-defense.
Why did you hit me in the head, Leopold?
After that, the real fun begins. The house is revealed to be a deadly obstacle course with booby traps around every corner, and the tone ping-pongs back and forth between horror and comedy so fast you never know what's going to be behind any door.
Hey, that's just plain old silly.
It's a strange premise made even stranger by the execution. Not exactly your typical Looney Tunes fare, but one of my favorites regardless.
Give me your wishbone.
Released just a few months after The Skeleton Dance, Hell's Bells is likewise a dance-heavy silly symphony directed by Ub Iwerks and scored by Carl Stalling that prioritizes mood over story. But while Skeleton Dance has long been hailed as one of the greatest cartoons ever made, Hell's Bells has been all but forgotten, which is a shame because I think it's the stronger of the two. The film depicts a group of demons serving the devil in hell and acts as a sort of rough draft for the Night on Bald Mountain sequence from Fantasia. Obviously the animation's nowhere near Fantasia's level, but it does anticipate the same sinister undertone that would go on to make Bald Mountain so scary. There's a real sense of violence and perversion running below the surface here. You've got these goofy looking characters dancing around with big stupid smiles on their faces, then suddenly one will turn around and swallow the other whole, and then go right back to dancing like nothing happened. It's upsetting in a cow and chicken sort of way. It's not that much more graphic than any other cartoon, but somehow it still feels like something you're not supposed to be watching. Like, just look at this shot and tell me it doesn't make you feel dirty inside. Unlike Skeleton Dance, this one does have something like a 3-act structure, or at least it has a real ending. One of the minions refuses to be fed to Cerberus and runs away, so Satan chases him to the edge of the pit where he's tricked into falling in himself. The flames of hell rise up like hands, and then, in one of my favorite moments in any Disney cartoon, pants him, spake him, and pull him to his death. Classic bit of Disney fanny humor. Walt loved him a good spanking gag, and he used them as often as he could. It's just too bad Fantasia didn't end this way too. It probably would have made a lot more money if it had.
I'm steampunk now. Yeah, I don't know what that is, man.
It's hard to remember a time when the steampunk aesthetic wasn't annoyingly omnipresent, but back in the early 2000s, the market for homemade brass doohickeys and retro-future accoutrement wasn't quite as oversaturated as it is today.
I live in the clock now.
Enter Jasper Morello, an aerial navigator from a Victorian future world racked with plague, who joins the crew of a fabulous flying machine and sets off on a mission of discovery. Visually, it's one of the most ambitious short films I've ever seen. It mixes the shadow puppet style of Lottie Reiniger with advanced CGI and 3D models to create some truly staggering shots. Each new environment is rich with depth and detail, almost every frame contains some sort of unique special effect, and somehow the stylized character designs blend perfectly with the much more realistic backgrounds. It's like if you took just the best 25 minutes of Atlantis and then cut out all the stuff that doesn't fit.
The creature is the cure.
The story takes a horror turn when Morello discovers a creature whose blood contains a cure for the plague, but who conversely needs her own diet of human blood to survive, and who starts picking off members of the crew one by one with a little help from their resident mad scientist. It's a nice classic monster premise that the Hammer studio would have loved, but the hero here is the animation. At a time when mainstream animation was hitting a creative nadir, I remember sitting in a theater watching this film and feeling like the possibilities of the medium were endless. It was intended to be the first chapter in a tetralogy, which sadly never came to fruition, but maybe still will one day. In the meantime, at least we've got this one to show us what might have been, and to guide any other filmmakers brave enough to follow its path.
Perhaps they will require a navigator.
One of Disney's go-to story templates in the 30s was to team up Mickey, Donald, and Goofy by giving them an unusual job or task to perform, which would inevitably fall apart by the end of the runtime. The trio would set out on their mission, split off into 3 different subplots, then come back together at the end for a climactic finale. It was the perfect formula and gave the characters experience in all kinds of fields, from clock cleaning to moose hunting to boat building to, in this case, ghost busting.
Why the scared of no ghosts?
Lonesome Ghost pits our heroes against a group of pesky poltergeists and served as a direct inspiration not just for Ivan Reitman, but also for the run of haunted house comedies that saw a wave of popularity in the 40s and 50s. All 3 of Disney's male leads are in fine form here. The slapstick is tight and well-timed, and the ghosts are a great set of villains. I really love the way their voices echo like they're speaking from another dimension. It's a gag cartoon, so naturally it's more funny than scary, but the visuals are loaded with spooky atmosphere. All the classic mood setter shots are here. We get the dusty, cobweb-covered furniture, the shutters flapping open and closed, and look, we even get the windy leaves. Doesn't matter if it's snowing outside, you gotta have those in there. I'm telling you people, this is Spooky Cartoon 101. Throw some leaves across the screen, your spook factor automatically goes up like 500%. Works every time. Don't get fancy, don't mess with the formula, you are not too good for the leaves.
We're from the Ajax Ghost Exterminator Company.
This is easily my favorite era of Mickey cartoons, and the ones that pair him with Donald and Goofy rank him on the studio's all-time best. Lonesome Ghost isn't quite my top pick of that bunch. I'd probably give that award to Mickey's Trailer, with Mickey's Fire Brigade in a close second, but I might put it third, which is a high bar. It's a really great cartoon all around. I like it a lot. At a 2003 animation festival in Tokyo, 140 filmmakers from across the globe were asked to vote on what they considered to be the greatest animated works of all time. There were no restrictions placed on what qualified, and the resulting list included everything from feature films to TV shows to music videos to commercials. But the title selected as the single greatest piece of animation in history was a humble 10-minute Soviet cartoon by the name of Hedgehog in the Fog.
По вечерам ежик ходил к медвежонку считать звезды.
Created by Russian husband-wife duo Yuri Norstein and Francesca Yarbasova, the film is a thing of pure beauty, a pastoral tone poem about a mild-mannered hedgehog who sets out to meet a friend for a night of stargazing and the existential crisis he faces after losing his way. It's not spooky exactly, at least not in the same way as the other cartoons on this list, but it's certainly eerie. It lets you feel on a deeply intimate level what it's like to be a tiny creature in a huge world, floating down a river, unable to change your course, dwarfed by beings too majestic to even notice your presence. You won't see any ghosts or demons here, but even a passing leaf is enough to make your life flash before your eyes. See what I mean? Don't underestimate the leaves. Norstein and Yarbasova are notorious perfectionists, renowned for dedicating an obsessive amount of time and work to each project. Now in their 80s, their full filmography consists of only a handful of short films, and for the past 4 decades they've been working on one single, still incomplete feature, often refusing outside funding to finish the project so they can make sure it stays true to their personal vision. Many see this as inspirational, proof that quality is more important than quantity and that great art is worth the time it takes to produce. But to me, their tale is a cautionary one. As someone who takes a long time to make videos and often has difficulty finishing what I start, I'd like to believe that I'm just like Norstein and Yarbasova. But the problem is, I'm not. I never will be. I could dedicate the entire rest of my life to a single project and it wouldn't be even close to as good as Hedgehog in the Fog. So yeah, if you're literally the greatest artist in your field, and you're sitting on an incomplete masterpiece that might someday change the face of art as we know it, then by all means, take your time. Do whatever you need to do, we'll wait. And if you die before it's finished, we'll go to sleep dreaming of what might have been. But if you're not at that level, then you do eventually have some artistic obligation to finish your work and move on to the next project. Otherwise, how do you expect to get any better? Basically, what I'm trying to say is that I've started a Patreon. I know my output is very slow and that it's been over 2 years since the last entry in my Disney series, but I'm hoping to turn that around in the coming months and I need your help. Sign up through the link in the description and you'll get access to all kinds of perks like your name in the credits, behind the scenes updates, and bonus videos, which I don't yet have.
Someday I might. Shut up.
I've reduced my hours at my job and I'm dedicating that extra time solely to focusing on this channel, but I don't know how long that'll be sustainable, so if you like what I'm doing here, please consider becoming part of the team. And if that's not possible for you right now, no worries, you can always support the channel just by leaving a like or a comment. I really appreciate each and every last one of you. You're beautiful, I love you, and now back to the video.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Tonight, through the medium of the animated cartoon, we present a murder mystery condensed from authentic criminal records. It is my sincere purpose in exposing the brutal killer involved in this horrible case to prove to you beyond the shadow of a doubt that crime does not pay.
Tex Avery is to cartoonists what cartoonists are to everybody else. He's a parody of a parody. His films are so wild, so anarchic, so packed to the brim with over-the-top gags that the very idea of following a coherent structure is treated as laughable. This didn't always lead to great cartoons. Sometimes the jokes could be more random than funny, but when they land, and in Who Killed Who, every joke hits its mark.
I can't die at 11:30.
We open with a live-action narrator sternly warning us that crime doesn't pay and that everything we're about to see is absolutely true. We then zoom in on a creepy mansion and hear a woman screaming from the inside, but the scream goes on so long it starts to feel more like a piece of performance art. Then we're introduced to the victim, helpfully identified in neon, reading the novelization of the very cartoon he's in and discovering his own fate moments before it happens. A detective shows up to investigate, and from then on, all bets are off. Story is thrown out the window and the gags come every second on the second, each one more nonsensical than the last.
Who's there?
A skeleton.
I feel stupid even trying to describe the film. It's like trying to describe to Borat how a not joke works. I can explain the references, I can tell you who Red Skelton was, but no summary I can give could possibly encapsulate why something like this is funny.
Ah, yes! What a bunch of us, isn't it?
You really just have to see it. It's a force unto itself. A slap in the face of logic and a whoopee cushion under the seat of decency. Even the grammatically incorrect title feels like an act of rebellion.
Now we'll see who done it.
I do it.
I wish my brother George was here.
In the second and best of 3 Jekyll and Hyde themed cartoons directed by Fritz Freleng, Bugs Bunny reveals to us that he has a sugar daddy in the park who feeds him carrots each morning, and who on this particular day has agreed to adopt him and take him home as a pet. Little does Bugs know, however, that his benefactor is none other than one Dr. Jekyll, already addicted to the formula that turns him into the monstrous Mr. Hyde. The artwork here is fantastic. I can't get enough of these beautiful, bucolic backgrounds, and I really love the design of Jekyll. He's such a gentle little man, but there's something slightly off about him. Something a little too vacant in the eyes. You can tell he's not entirely there, even if you can't quite put your finger on why.
Oh, that would make me very happy.
The transformation scenes are also a highlight. Jekyll had some incredible poses in the in-between stages. He goes through about a dozen different art styles in less than a second. Like, if you're an aspiring animator, go watch these scenes frame by frame. It really is a masterclass. But it's the design of Hyde that really launches this one to greatness. In fact, I think this might be my all-time favorite version of the character. Hyde's not a literal monster in the book. He's the darker side of Jekyll's personality, but he's still supposed to look like a relatively normal human being, and this has led to some odd choices in film adaptations. How do you design a marketable horror movie monster when the plot still requires that he function as a regular member of society? But cartoons face no such dilemma. You can make him as hideous as you want and he'll still fit right in, and this, I think, is the best he's ever looked. Every element of the design perfectly captures that old Penny Dreadful appeal. The boiling red eyes and green skin, the long, hairy arms, limp wrists, knuckles dragging behind him like a gorilla. This may not be how he's described in the book, but when we as a culture say the word Hyde, this is what we're referring to. It's also fun to see a cartoon where Bugs doesn't always have the upper hand, since those come so rarely. It takes a truly great villain to hold their own against him, and for once, I think he's finally met his match. One type of film that I've avoided including in this video is that of the unintentionally scary variety. Look up any Halloween listicle of spooky cartoons and half of what you'll find will be films that aren't spooky at all, but rather weird, or uncanny, or disturbing. And often what these descriptors really mean is that they're simply animated in a style unfamiliar to American audiences. There are more than enough deliberately scary cartoons out there to fill your October lineup several times over, so why pass them up in favor of perfectly nice cartoons that just happen to look a little unconventional? The Mascot seems at first to be one such cartoon. Created by Russian husband-wife duo Yuri Norstein and Francesca Yarbasova. No, wait. Created by Russian father-daughter duo Ladislas and Yaren Starovich, the film is divided into 2 distinct halves. In the first, a poor, sickly girl claims that what she wants more than anything in the world is to taste an orange, which her mother can't possibly afford on her meager earnings as a toy maker. The next morning, the toys come alive and escape on their way to market, and one lone puppy goes off in search of an orange to bring back to the ailing child. The stop motion here is some of the best you'll ever see. Yes, it's occasionally uncanny, but it's also whimsical, full of character, and insanely detailed, especially in the facial expressions. The movement is incredibly fluid, and there's some real subtle character work on display that must have taken ages to get right. There are a few dark moments, like when one of the puppets gets decapitated by a car, but he turns out okay. For the most part, it seems to be just a very cute story with an adorable lead character. Then we get to Act 2. Seemingly out of nowhere, Satan himself appears and calls together hordes of diabolical beings for a glorious midnight ball. Somehow our hero gets mixed up with the crowd and finds himself lost in a soiree of sin and depravity as more and more bizarre creatures arrive to populate the screen. The film is an absolute feast for the eyes and was a clear influence on many stop-motion films to follow, most notably Nightmare Before Christmas, which borrows heavily from its imagery. But none of its followers have ever surpassed its visual splendor. You see films today with advanced mechanical puppets that each have hundreds of tiny parts and replaceable faces, and it's all very impressive. But then you look at what the Starviches were able to do with just some trash and a pair of tweezers, and you have to wonder if we're doing something wrong. There are a few different versions of the film online. It's been released under various different titles and edits over the decades, but the most recent restoration brings it back to nearly its original length and in crystal clear resolution, so I'll leave a link to that one if you're interested. It's amazing how great it still looks. In October of 1932, Walt Disney was reviewing footage for an upcoming Mickey Mouse cartoon when he saw an image that made his jaw hit the floor. The scene depicted an evil scientist who had kidnapped Pluto and taken him off to his secret island lair. Tying the poor pup to a wall, the madman took a pair of scissors in his hands and, in a moment of pure nightmare fuel, graphically cut Pluto's shadow in half. Horrified, Walt asked Supervisor Ben Sharpstein who was responsible for the sequence, and Sharpstein pointed to an ambitious young trainee by the name of Art Babbitt. "We're gonna have to hold this guy down," Sharpstein reportedly said. "No," Disney replied, "we're gonna have to bring the other guys up." The Mad Doctor is one of the few straight horror films Disney ever made. It's not a parody, it's not a mood piece, it's just a chilling tale packed with as many scary moments as possible. It was also a big leap forward artistically. You compare this to a Mickey Mouse cartoon like The Haunted House from a few years earlier, and the difference is colossal. The villain is much more threatening, the backgrounds are more detailed, the violence is more palpable, there are way more windy leaves, every shot feels like it's trying to show us something we've never seen before. Now, a few of these shots we actually have seen before. These bats had already been used in The Haunted House, which had itself recycled them from the skeleton dance. This very cool 3D tracking shot was lifted from a silly symphony called Egyptian Melodies, and there are probably many more examples like this, not just in this cartoon, but in most of the others we've discussed so far. I bring this up as a reminder for those looking to study this period of animation. There's one thing that no classic cartoon should ever be given credit for, and that's originality. These studios were constantly plagiarizing, both from each other and from themselves. No idea was new, everything was cannibalized, and they pretty much always got away with it. Think of the most original cartoon premise you ever remember seeing, and I guarantee you if you go back far enough, you'll find the idea was stolen from someone else who stole it from someone else, and so on and so on and so on. So when I praise the inventiveness of a particular cartoon, I'm not saying that it did anything that had never been done before, but rather that it feels like it had never been done before. That it feels like the animators are testing the limits of their craft and pushing it into new territories. And that sense of daring is what really makes a film stand the test of time, more so than any innovation or novelty. There have been lots of cartoons over the years much darker and more violent than anything Disney ever made, but when I watch the Mad Doctor cleave Pluto's shadow in two, I can feel the power of the artist behind the pen. I can feel the energy in Art Babbitt's hands as he created something he never knew he was capable of, and how nervous he must have been wondering if he'd get away with it. And I find that terrifying, in all the best ways.
Stand up, you sinner. We got you at last.
In his excellent book of Mice and Magic, cinema uberdork Leonard Maltin summarizes the difference between Disney's cartoons and Fleischer's by saying that Disney's deal with a child's natural fears, while Fleischer's depict adult traumas and emotions. I love this quote because at no point in the surrounding paragraphs does Maltin specify that he's referring only to the intentionally dark cartoons. He merely takes it for granted that fear is the central tenet of both studios and that the only difference between the two is who they're trying to scare. This is perhaps most evident in Swing You Sinners, a grown-up fable from Fleischer that couldn't be further from the storybook morality plays of Disney. Here, we see Betty Boop's boyfriend Bimbo, although in one of his earlier designs where he looks a lot more like Bosco.
Bosco?
Out late one night trying to steal a chicken when he's intercepted by the literal arm of the law. He runs for cover in a cemetery, but in true Fleischer fashion, the gate closes up behind him and swallows the key, and the gravestones come alive and sing to him an absolutely terrifying song about the fate he's earned through his life of misdeeds. The crimes they list are specifically of an adult nature, not telling lies or skipping school, but shooting craps, chasing women, living in complete debauchery with no thought for the world that waits beyond. And unlike, say, A Christmas Carol, here the spirits aren't trying to warn him, they're only here to gloat. His fate is already sealed, and now comes the wailing and gnashing of teeth.
Where you want your body sent? Body? Oh, there ain't gonna be no body.
Bimbo tries to plead his case, but to no avail. The walls close in to trap him, the earth itself reaches up to pull him under. All manner of ghouls and goblins rise from their graves to terrorize this poor, wayward soul. It builds to a beautifully surreal climax, with reality fading further and further away as Bimbo is chased off into the underworld, a maniacal chorus of nightmare creatures following close behind. And if this were a Disney cartoon, a nightmare is probably what it would turn out to be. But no one wakes up from the world of Fleischer. This is the end for dear Bimbo, and it's a bitter end indeed.
My story begins. A woman speaks.
In stark contrast to Fleischer, Disney had a lukewarm relationship to surrealism, preferring to hold on to some semblance of logic in his cartoons unless it was for a dream or fantasy sequence, and even then there was usually still a clear rationale for what we were seeing. But if there's any Disney artist who stood as an exception to this rule, it was Jack Kinney.
Are you Mr. D. Duck?
Kinney worked for Disney for 27 years, and it's remarkable he stayed so long given how decidedly un-Disney-ish his style tended to be. Films like Der Fuhrer's Face, Hockey Homicide, and How to Be a Detective play fast and loose with the Disney idea of reality, pushing the studio far away from its fairy tale trappings and into a hyper-stylized satire of modern American life, often framed against the pulpiest adult genres, which is precisely where we find Donald at the start of this cartoon.
If I sell just 6 more subscriptions, I'll win a real Moxie bicycle.
Donald is up late one night reading dime novels and listening to trashy radio programs when his imagination starts to run away with him, allowing a collection of zany characters to escape from the pages and invade his home. The intruders, who include an early Jessica Rabbit prototype, instantly set about terrorizing Donald, pulling him into their convoluted narratives and pinning him as the fall guy for their crimes. But far more than just the characters emerge. The stories themselves start to take over, and the foundation of Donald's reality crumbles before his feet.
Here.
All sense of sanity is vanquished. The backgrounds swap to new locations every few seconds, characters climb over each other's bodies and act as one being with no explanation why, laws like gravity and object permanence are broken with criminal expertise, as are many actual criminal laws. It's completely unlike any other Disney cartoon, but what makes it uniquely disturbing is that Donald is fully conscious while all of this is happening. It's not some fever dream, these are just the natural wanderings of his mind. Added to this, he doesn't even find any of it that strange. He goes with it, playing along with the absurdity even to the point of his own demise.
Take that!
Again, if this were a Fleischer cartoon, it wouldn't feel out of place, but juxtaposing this kind of surrealism against the warmth and comfort of the Disney universe is genuinely unsettling. And while there are probably scarier cartoons on this list, I've never seen another one that makes me feel as wrong-footed as this. Returning to the current century, our next short comes to us from indie whiz kid Bill Plimpton, and if you don't know who Bill Plimpton is, think Ralph Bakshi but hornier. Plimpton's unhinged collages of sex and violence earned him a regular spot on MTV in the 80s before he subsequently moved into short films and then finally features, with 1992's brilliant musical fantasy The Tune.
Why am I watching this?
There's not a lot of his work that I can get away with showing on this channel, but fortunately his spookiest cartoon is also one of his tamest, a sleek, jazzy neo-noir about a bed and breakfast where guests seem to be constantly losing their heads. The opening shot is a tour de force. In a single take, we pull in on a wide exterior view of the hotel, then follow one guest in silhouette slowly ascending the stairs, our sense of dread mounting with each floor as we wonder what waits for him at the top. After a full minute of build-up, he finally reaches his room, undresses, settles in, turns out the light, and at long last triggers the crescendo. It's much cleaner looking than most of Plimpton's other work, which makes it a good entry point for new fans. Plimpton does all his own animation and retains full creative control over every film, meaning they're all catered to his own very juvenile sense of humor and all drawn with his signature scratchy style that hides its inner beauty under several layers of grotesquerie. But Shut Eye Hotel dials this back with smooth camera work, elegant CGI, and a relatively straightforward horror mystery that serves as a nice stepping stone to his more extreme cartoons. If you can take this one, you can probably take a film like Cheatin', then move on to the Guard Dog series, then Your Face, then I Married a Strange Person, and if you're still on board by that point, then congratulations, you're a fan. Your world of film just got a little bit wider and a whole lot smuttier.
Hit it!
For the first several years of the sound era, animation was dominated by its relationship to music. Everyone wanted to replicate what Disney had achieved with the Skeleton Dance, so they each started their own series of musical cartoons blatantly ripping off Disney's. But for my money, there was never a more perfect union of animation and song than that between Fleischer and Cab Calloway.
Folks, now here's a story about Minnie the Moocher.
Calloway collaborated with Fleischer on 3 Betty Boop cartoons in the early 30s, all of which are scary in their own way, but Minnie the Moocher came first and it's the most classically Halloweeny of the bunch. Betty and Bimbo run away from home one evening and hide out in an abandoned cave, only to discover that it's not abandoned at all, but populated by a horde of spirits who sing to Betty an allegorical tale about the path she's headed down. It's a similar premise to Swing You Sinners, and there's nothing all that new about the ghosts. If anything, they're a little more restrained this time around. But it's Calloway who elevates this one into something completely new. Fleischer filmed Calloway in live action and then rotoscoped his loose-limbed choreography onto the body of a singing walrus, creating a deliriously eerie effect that's as mesmerizing as it is absurd.
She messed around with a bloke named Smokey.
Max Fleischer had invented the rotoscope back in the 1910s for his Inkwell series, filming his brother Dave in a clown suit and then tracing over the footage to create realistic movement. But rotoscoping presented a number of problems, because most animated characters aren't designed to move like real human beings, hence that good old uncanny quality. Most successful instances of rotoscoping don't actually use the traced footage for the final shot, but rather use it as a reference and then create new animation from scratch, modifying the speed and proportions as needed to fit the character. Fleischer had neither the time nor the money for all that, so by the end of the 20s they'd mostly given up on rotoscoping, but they brought it back for this cartoon, and this time, instead of working their way around the uncanny valley, they dove right into it. Calloway's dancing, already a rejection of natural human movement, flows across the screen with a strange and haunting smoothness that's deeply unnerving, and combined with his vocals wailing over the soundtrack, it all feels more genuinely ghost-like than anything else attempted in early cinema. Add to that the song itself, which is about a girl turning to sex work and getting addicted to opium before an untimely death, and it's enough to send any rebellious youth running back home for good. The career of Tim Burton has long been a source of intrigue and frustration to many. How did the young artist who burst onto the film scene with such a unique, anti-authority style end up making little but uninspired remakes and sequels, often for the same studio he'd once rejected for stifling his creativity? Is he a hack who sold out? A rebel fighting from within? Is he entering a comeback phase now, or is Hollywood just so starved for flavor that even his nostalgia-bait reboots suddenly feel fresh again? Personally, I think Burton's work has always been a mixed bag, and that his career trajectory is much less of a straight downward line than people remember. But if I were to try and summarize his general decline, I'd say it's less due to a decrease in quality, and more just that he already said everything he became a filmmaker to say. In fact, I think he said it even before he started making features.
Vincent Malloy is 7 years old. He's always polite and does what he's told.
Burton made Vincent in 1982 in what would soon become his signature visual style, a blend of German expressionism, gothic horror, and 1950s B-movies that would go on to define the fashion choices of exactly one table at every high school cafeteria in America. The film tells the story of a young boy who lives a dreary suburban life, but in his mind escapes to the tormented fictional realms of Edgar Allan Poe and Vincent Price, with expert narration provided by Price himself.
He doesn't mind living with his sister, dog, and cats. though he'd rather share a home with spiders and bats.
Everything fans love about Burton is already on display. The young protagonist fascinated by death, the stark black and white, the twisted scenery, the chiaroscuro lighting, the isolation, the ennui, the big eyes, it's all here, perfectly packaged together in one tiny little story, no assembly required. For the past 40 years, Burton has continued to follow Vincent's blueprint, and often he's done so quite well, but I think the reason it feels like he never really grew as an artist is because he was fully formed from the very beginning. You don't have to study his complete filmography to understand what he's trying to say, because he already told us. Simply put, don't be Vincent Malloy. Be Vincent Price. Released just a month before Snow White, The Old Mill is the culmination of everything Disney had been building up to in their silly symphonies, and served as a final dress rehearsal before moving into features. The film introduced many of Disney's most impressive effects and innovations from this era, most notably the multiplane camera, and you can see the clear influence it had on all 5 Golden Age films. The story is as simple as can be. A group of animals live together in a rundown mill which takes a severe beating in a windstorm, but is ultimately fine. But packed into that microscopic narrative is an awe-inspiring, life-affirming tale about the persistence of nature through the harshest conditions. It's beauty incarnate, a perfect encapsulation of the skills Walt and his team had been developing throughout the 30s. If I were ranking this list solely based on the quality of the films themselves, this would be at the very top. It might be my all-time favorite cartoon. Maybe tied with Hedgehog in the Fog. Actually, make that a 3-way tie with the Dover Boys.
No one will ever know!
The only reason it's not number 1 here is because it doesn't feature any actual Halloween material. There's no malicious or supernatural forces in play, just Mother Nature doing her thing. But even so, I think it feels appropriate for the holiday, and clearly Disney does too, since they always feature it whenever they do a Halloween special. You do feel real fear for the animals, especially in the film's most famous sequence, where a mother bird throws herself over her eggs to prevent them from being crushed by the mill spinning gears. They do the Buster Keaton thing and have her saved by the fact that one cog in the wheel is missing, but even after this discovery, she still has to relive the near-death experience over and over as the gears continue to turn throughout the night. Another big part of the spooky atmosphere comes from Lee Harling's score, which incorporates a few bits of Strauss but is mostly an original composition mixed together from the sounds of nature, and in my opinion stands alongside the Dance Macabre and Thriller as one of the greatest pieces of Halloween music ever written. This is Disney firing on all cylinders, a pitch-perfect silly symphony and the gold standard of what a cartoon can be. For the second time on our list, we're drawing from the well of Pluto in Peril cartoons. Pluto was Disney's most expressive character and therefore capable of eliciting much more sympathy than the studio's other early stars. This was largely thanks to the efforts of one man, Norm Ferguson, Disney's resident Pluto specialist who almost single-handedly revolutionized the art of character animation.
Is all this just to get an expression on the dog's face? Yeah, that's the idea.
Before Ferguson, characters could only really act or react, showing one emotion at a time, usually played as broadly as possible. But with Pluto, Ferguson slowed things down and took the time to actually get under the skin of the character. In one famous sequence from 1934, Pluto gets stuck to a piece of flypaper and struggles to get it off. A simple gag idea that would normally take about 15 seconds of screen time, but is here stretched to over a minute as we watch his fully internalized thought process while he attempts to free himself. It was this innovation, more so even than anything in the old mill, that paved the way for animated features. Because for the first time, audiences were no longer just laughing at the character, but could actually empathize with the complex emotions they were showing. Emotions like confusion, frustration, and most importantly, fear. This brings us to Pluto's Judgment Day, rightfully hailed as one of Disney's scariest cartoons and a legitimately great satire of the American court system.
You solemnly swear to tell the whole truth and nothing but the hardest evil figure, so help you.
Shut up.
After being scolded for chasing a kitten, Pluto dreams that he's gone to a cat-governed hell and been put on trial for his many crimes against the feline race. The trial is clearly rigged against him, as evidenced by a jury decidedly not of his peers and a deliberation room fixed with a revolving door. Though, to be fair, Pluto is also incredibly guilty. The real horror of the film is finding out that such a beloved character has been chasing cats to their deaths, leaving countless destroyed lives and broken families in his wake.
That great big bully picked on me because I was so fat. He chased me under a steamroller, and then he left me flat.
You can tell this is another one where the animators knew they were making something special. There are a ton of great little details, like the cat-shaped trees in the background when Pluto first starts dreaming, or this terrific shot of the entrance to Hell, clearly an inspiration for the Cave of Wonders from Aladdin. It's also one that's been imitated by a number of other studios. Tom and Jerry reused the premise for Heavenly Puss, as did Sylvester and Tweety for Satan's Waitin', both excellent. And since my mom will get mad at me if I don't mention it, so did Hanna-Barbera for an episode of the Huckleberry Hound Show starring Pixie, Dixie, and Mr. Jinx.
If you will go up, or down.
But Pluto's Judgment Day stands above the rest, largely because Pluto himself is such a great character, one who can still wring emotions out of his audience even 90 years later. I said back in the Fantasia video that I consider Disney's Night on Bald Mountain to be the greatest piece of animation ever put to film, but weirdly there's another version of Bald Mountain that's in close contention for that title as well. Created by Russian husband-wife duo... Russian father-daughter duo... Russian-American husband-wife duo Alexander Alexiev and Claire Parker, the film sent Mussorgsky's composition to music 7 years before Fantasia did it, and in many ways it's even scarier in its execution. It focuses less on synchronization with the music and more on the disturbing imagery it evokes, the kind of pictures your semi-conscious brain might form if you listen to the piece as you fell asleep. It's still recognizable as the same story, but it's much more abstract than Disney's version. The demons shift in and out of existence, distorting and transmogrifying before our eyes, seemingly on their way to the celebration, but often stopping to strike an unholy pose or attack each other with violent carnality. Many of the motifs are difficult to interpret, like this repeated shot of a horse dying and regaining life over and over before having its skin eaten away by a flock of crows, represented by the sudden appearance of real human teeth gnawing through the screen. It's very confusing and upsetting, and you absolutely can't look away. The film pioneered a laborious new technique called pin screen animation, which is exactly what it sounds like. Hundreds of thousands of pins are pushed through a large board and precisely positioned for each shot, then lit from the side to cast shadows that form the images of the frame. It's one of the most time-consuming modes of animation ever invented, and unsurprisingly has rarely been used since. But the few films that survive in this style have a strikingly unique look that would be impossible to achieve in any other medium. I know I already said basically the same thing about the Mascot, but I really can't get over how ahead of its time this was. If I showed you these images with no context, you'd probably assume they were created with computers in the late 90s, not with sewing materials in the early 30s. The textures are so tactile and real that you feel like the film is pulling you into its own dimension, and every time a character moves outside the frame, I find my eyes following them off the screen trying to see where they're going. It's like when you show your cat a bird video and he only kind of understands that it's not real. Like I said, I would still give Disney's Bald Mountain a slight edge over this one, but this has an excellent companion piece and very worthy of the comparison. Alright. Apologies to Captain Christian. I'm breaking my rules for our next spooky tune, since it's one that you'd watch in your own living room. No theatrical short, but an old TV special that at a young age into my heart did nestle. You said no TV shows, the comments will shout. Well yes, but there's one that's too good to leave out. Granted, Great Pumpkin should then be here too, but you've seen that already. No one's seen The Grinch 2.
I suggest we stay indoors tonight. I suggest we lock ourselves in tight.
The film is among Geisel's greatest creations, full of witty verboseness and Bowdlerizations, a prequel of sorts to The Grinch Who Stole Christmas, but viewed through a lens something like a meniscus. Chuck Jones and Old Karloff are swapped with new names, like Baldwin and Conried of Bullwinkle fame. They give to the film a much grimier feel, a stickier texture that's slimy and real, but still true to the book, in some ways even more so. See the Grinch's red eyes and his big shaggy torso. It carves its own path with its verbal acuity, its ending avoids all direct continuity, it's best not when viewed as a prequel, instead think more a dark timeline with a bearded Abed.
I wouldn't go out on a night like this for $1.50.
So on one stormy night, when the wind is a-howling, and inside their tree stumps the grey grumps are growling, and down in the pond there are hackencracks yelling, and much to my pleasure, the leaves are all blowing, we meet our old friend, man of tricks, not of treats, though these days a man mostly known for grink tweets, who starts to descend from atop Crumpet's perch to wreak havoc on Whoville, but then with a lurch, he's stopped by a steadfast, nearsighted young lad. Euchariah's the name, and boy is this bad, because now to save Whoville and all of its lives, he must stall the foul Grinch Grinch until morning arrives. And so as the boy summons all of his might and climbs to the top of the wagon with fright, with the wickedest grin the Grinch lifts up a shroud and unleashes a hellscape to make Fleischer proud. For decades, the film remained lost in obscurity, no one to champion its wit and maturity, but in recent years there's a following gained, at least based on the fan art the web has obtained. Perhaps younger viewers have heard the film's cry. Analytics suggest you know better than I, so hopefully someday its drought will be over, and fans will revisit it every October. And while Christmas Grinch will remain the OG, in my heart, Grinch Night is the GOAT. Whew. That was actually way easier to write than the rest of these reviews. I think I'm going to do all my videos in couplets from now on.
True, I'm nervous. Very, very dreadfully nervous. But why will you say that I'm mad?
By the 1950s, the golden age of cartoons was coming to an end. Demand had died out. Audiences could watch cheaply made television programs from the comfort of their homes, so there was barely any market for feature-length animated films, let alone shorts. But just as the art form was taking its dying breaths, one small studio came on the scene to throw it a lifeline. United Productions of America, or UPA, revitalized the industry with a cost-effective style that changed the game for everyone. Rejecting the tenets of Disney, UPA instead took a minimalist approach, relying on flat characters, limited sets, and tricks of scale and perspective to create the illusion of 3D environments. But unlike the assembly line animation on TV, UPA used these techniques as opportunities rather than shortcuts, opening up their films to levels of experimentation never before seen in the studio era. Without the confines of realism, characters could teleport from one environment to the next in a single step, wander across time periods or in and out of flashbacks, even into the recesses of their own minds, which is where we find ourselves in the very best UPA cartoon, a breathtaking adaptation of The Telltale Heart.
See how calmly, how precisely I can tell the story to you.
Narrated in the velvety transatlantic tones of James Mason, the film makes expressionistic use of light and shadow to create a world so dreamlike it's difficult to even process on a conscious level. Never before has cinema so effectively taken us inside the mind of a madman. The camera slips through the bounds of reality like a bar of soap. Images will remain disconcertingly still, then suddenly melt into a flurry of shapes and patterns intercut with grotesquely detailed shots of human hands and faces. The effect of all this is that we too are the madman. We too feel our personal space being violated by the stare of that milky white eye, and our sanity torn to shreds by the beating of that hideous heart.
Stop it! Stop it, you devils! Yes, I did it! It's there, under the floor!
UPA's reign was short-lived, and while they managed to delay the death of the Hollywood cartoon for a little while, they were ultimately just prolonging the inevitable. But in its wake, animation fell into new hands, those of the independent creators, the visionary artists who had spent their youth studying the craft of the professionals and now arrived to show us what the amateurs could do. And with films like Telltale Heart to guide them, they created some of the most daring and radical works of art ever put on screen, the kinds of thing only a madman could dream of.
We are the members of Do It or Die. D-I, D-I, D-I. Watch us make bimbo as easy as pie. D-I, D-I, D-I. B-I-M-B-O. Bimbo!
Bimbo is the most psychologically fascinating character in all of cartoon history. Any therapist would have their hands full trying to trace the path of his evolution. We've seen him pop up a few times on this list already, but you might have missed his first appearance because he started his career under a different name. Fitz, the canine sidekick who we first saw exploring haunted houses with Coco the Clown. Fitz starred alongside Coco in several silent films, but when the Inkwell series ended due to legal issues, Fleischer found themselves in need of a new star, so Fitz was given a makeover and reintroduced as Bimbo, the studio's answer to Mickey Mouse. But Bimbo didn't exactly catch on.
Well, Your Honor, you see, it was this way.
Early Fleischer didn't require their animators to follow any sort of set house style, and it was pretty common for characters to change appearances from film to film, or even from shot to shot, so Bimbo had a radically different look in each of his first several cartoons. Audiences watching Silly Scandals might not even realize that this was supposed to be the same character from Dizzy Dishes, so he had a hard time gaining popularity. Add to this the fact that Bimbo, like all Mickey Mouse ripoffs, didn't didn't really have a personality, and you're left with a character who's barely a character at all, certainly not someone whose name is going to draw the crowds back in for more. By the time he'd settled into his finalized design, it was already clear that Bimbo was not going to be the next big thing, and the studio quickly set about finding a brighter star to replace him, which didn't take long.
I have to have love.
Betty Boop was first introduced as Bimbo's half-dog female counterpart, but she immediately eclipsed him in popularity, so Fleischer swapped her dog ears out for a pair of hoop earrings and made her the main attraction, with Bimbo relegated to the role of useless love interest.
I can't open the door now. I'm in my nightie.
All right. I'll wait till you take it off.
This dynamic worked out fine for a few years, but then came the Hays Code, and the Fleischer cartoons had to be significantly toned down. Betty's signature flapper dress was extended below the knee, and her overt sexual nature was traded in for a life of dreary domesticity. But that was nothing compared to what they did to Bimbo. See, the Hays Code prohibited any depiction of impure love, be that adultery, homosexuality, or even that most unspeakable of crimes, bestiality.
But they're my favorite.
Betty had become a full-on human, but Bimbo was still a dog, and an easily aroused one at that, so theirs was a love that could never have been allowed.
What would you say if I married you?
Now, Bimbo could have gone domestic like Betty and carried on as just a platonic friend, but that wouldn't have given Fleischer much to work with. Betty's censorship was a betrayal of her character, but she at least still had a character. She was still recognizably Betty, even if most of the oop was gone from her a dupe. But if you take away Bimbo's sexuality, you don't have a lot left, because even though he'd starred in dozens of cartoons by this point, pretty much the only characteristic he'd developed was his insatiable hunger for Betty. So Fleischer had no choice but to demote Bimbo even further, and after one last makeover, reintroduced him yet again, this time as a tiny, wordless puppy named Pudgy, whom Betty could forever keep at her side with no fear of impropriety.
What's come over you? Acting like you do, trying to be rough.
And so Bimbo's career ended right where it began. Once the would-be shining star of the studio, he now returned to the kennel from whence he came, emasculated, dehumanized, and literally neutered. But even when he walked on two legs, Bimbo was always a lapdog. He was too submissive to be a true star, too enamored with surface-level pleasures to stand for anything deeper. While Mickey Mouse was nobly guiding our nation through a depression, Bimbo was out rolling dice and chasing tails, showing neither the integrity nor the impulse control to lead a studio. So what other choice did Fleischer have? What avenue is there for a sinner who can't stop sinning other than to shrink him down and hide him in the pocket of his lady until he learns to behave? Is there no other course of action available to such a lowly creature as this? No place that he can find solidarity without being stripped of his manhood in the name of decency? Is there really, dear viewers, nothing we can do for Bimbo? Well, there is one thing we could try. We could make him a Freemason.
By the mystic order of the...
Boom boom hacha, boom boom hacha, boom boom hacha, boom boom hacha.
Wanna be a member? Wanna be a member?
Bimbo's Initiation is widely considered the darkest cartoon Fleischer ever made, not because it's the scariest, but because of the inexplicable nature of its plot that continues to defy explanation after almost a century. So Bimbo is minding his merry business one day when he falls into an open manhole and gets locked inside by a mouse who looks suspiciously like Mickey. Don't read too much into that though, in the 30s, every cartoon mouse looks suspiciously like Mickey. He's greeted by a secret society aptly named Do It or Die, whose hooded members invite him and Son to join their mysterious fraternity.
Wanna be a member? Wanna be a member?
No!
Bimbo declines the offer, but soon discovers there's no way out of their underground lair, and every attempt at escape only pulls him deeper into their clutches. He finds himself lost in a hair-raising funhouse of horrors. Each room is set up with some sort of twisted contraption designed to prevent his leaving, while simultaneously meting out as much physical pain as possible, most of it aimed squarely at his hindquarters. As the film progresses, escape becomes out of the question. All Bimbo can do is run, descending deeper and deeper into the inferno with the trap snipping ever closer at his heels. There's no shortage of WTF moments. At one point, Bimbo's heart literally escapes from his body. At another, his shadow is decapitated by a giant razor blade. 2 years before, the Mad Doctor cut up Pluto's shadow, mind you. See what I was saying about originality. Really though, I think the film isn't as difficult to decode as its reputation suggests. The psychosexual torture devices are simply a parody of traditional hazing rituals, and while some of the more Freudian gags may seem a little risque to casual viewers, watch a few more Fleischer cartoons and you'll see this was all pretty par for the course. horse. To me though, what makes this the scariest cartoon of all time is the fact that it's specifically happening to Bimbo. Of all creatures on this earth, Bimbo should be the one most willing to join a fraternity. Never was there another person so in need of brotherhood, so desperate for a society willing to overlook his sins and give him a sense of purpose. So the fact that Bimbo, of all people, so adamantly rejects this offer leaves me with 100 horrifying questions. Does he know something we don't? What is Do It or Die? Who's running it? What do they stand for? Why, oh why can't Bimbo leave? Worry not though, for these questions will now be answered. As the film approaches its end and Bimbo's poor hiney has taken all the abuse it can, who else should enter the scene but Betty?
Come inside, big boy.
Bimbo follows her to another room where he's confronted once again by the lodge master, but this time he learns the truth.
No!
Do It or Die is Betty. With a seductive, butt-based dance, she invites Bimbo once again to join, and now he's all too happy to accept.
Wanna be a member, wanna be a member?
Yes! And lo and behold, all of Do It or Die is Betty. Whole chorus lines of Bettys remove their robes and welcome him in, finalizing his initiation with one giant celebratory spanking dance. This, it turns out, is the only institution to which Bimbo could ever have belonged. This wretch, this reprobate, this poor mangy cur now finally finds his community not through his fellow man, but through the woman to whom he was destined to be subsumed. He will always serve the order of the Cucumahacha, always live in masochistic submission to the whims of the Boop-Boop-a-Doop girl. And even if there's no place for him in the wholesome future of cartoons and he'll soon be crowded out by the Mickeys and the Caspers and the Plutos and the Popeyes, he can at least rest comfortably knowing that there's one club at which his card will always be accepted. So let us no longer fret over the fate of poor Bimbo. He's found his place at last.
Stand up, you sinner, we got you at last. You can't get away, there's no time for your finishing wine to be fast. Brothers and sisters, come on, get hot. We'll amputate your bodoyo and tie your bones in a knot. Did it down, did it down. Did it
Boy, the scared of no ghosts.